How's it going, guys? Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Phil Talk Sports Podcast. Phil Nunziata, Nick Rice here with you, and we are one step closer to the Super Bowl. Nick, how's it going, man?
Pretty good. Actually, after all of our slander about Jalen Hurts the other week, I'm surprised that we haven't gotten kicked off the air yet. So I
That's the
guess
beautiful
it's
thing
just a
about
matter of
YouTube.
time.
That's the
Yeah.
best thing about YouTube. You can't, I guess I can't say you can't get kicked off, but you got to do something way worse than slander Jalen Hurts to get kicked off of YouTube for sure.
Yeah, you might have to actually tell the truth about the Cowboys too. Then maybe that's crossing the line and you'll get kicked out, but not yet.
That's true. So we're coming off of what a lot of people are calling the best round of playoffs ever in the NFL. We had 4 games that came down not only to the wire, but to the last play of the game, 1 in overtime, or is it 1 in overtime, and 3 was just the last play of the game, winning by field goals here, which lead us to the NFC and AFC championship games, which is typically a really good weekend. It's only 2 games as opposed to the 4 that you get in other rounds, but usually feel that you're really looking forward to these matchups. And we might have a case here where, we've already seen the best playoff game of the year, and that's the one we'll talk about last, the Bills and the Chiefs. But there was plenty of great stuff going into the conference championship week, which we'll get to. But let's kick it off right at the very beginning of the weekend. Last weekend, we had the Bengals and the Titans. And the Titans are sitting as the number 1 seed. They had a week off. They're telling everybody how they're not getting the respect that they want. And then Ryan Tannehill sets the tone earlier, throwing a pick on his first play from scrimmage. And the Bengals just kind of trade blows with the Titans back and forth. And they end up getting the win at the buzzer. McPherson with the field goal as time expired. Bengals win 19-16 to go to their first AFC championship game since the 90s. And I think most people, unless you're maybe a fan of the NFC North, other teams, are pretty happy that the Bengals are where they are right now.
Yeah. First of all, kickers are people too. I forget where they drafted Evan McPherson, but he definitely drilled one for the brand, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. And he was drafted, and a lot of people gave them crap for even using a pick on a kicker. And, who's laughing now? Who's laughing now for sure?
Well, what is interesting, I've been listening throughout the week about division strengths, and they kind of, because I listen quite a bit to Colin Cowherd, and he talked about how sometimes teams go into the playoffs, especially this year with the disparity of divisions, not quite prepared. And that was, I think we saw with the Titans, they came out of the team in the division with the worst win-loss record, the AFC South. And the teams that are left standing, a lot of them are battle tested, like the Niners and the Rams out of the NFC West. That was the best division this year in terms of win percentage. AFC West was second. That's the Chiefs. AFC North was third. That's the Bengals. So the best divisions are represented in the end. And it's kind of like in college football, a lot of, I think you could compare to some degree the fact that even though we saw Cincinnati was as good as the rest of the college football landscape in the playoffs, they didn't quite look prepared only because they were playing. I mean, they were as prepared as anybody against an SEC school, but when you play a non-SEC conference, it's kind of hard to get that adjustment. I think that was the case with the Titans. And against the Bengals, they came out there, and Cincinnati looked like they played the Ravens twice, and they played the Steelers twice, and they just looked like the more physical team. Ironically, the Titans had 9 sacks, and they have to be pretty pissed about their pass defense because they still couldn't figure out a way to slow this guy down. He's just so good. And Joe Burrow got the last laugh at the end as Tannehill throws a pick to begin the game, to begin the second half, and to close the second half. That was a crazy stat about how they won it.
Yeah, just the 3 most important drives of the game, throwing interceptions on, no big deal. I mean, if I'm a Titans defensive player, I'm feeling okay. Like, look, we gave up 19 points, right? We sacked the guy 9 times. We probably hit him 9 more times, something like that, right? And they still find a way to lose. You mentioned, the 3 most important ones. Ryan Tannehill throws, you throw 3 picks in a game. There's just really not a chance, very little chance that you're going to come back from that. They did have Derrick Henry back. That might have been overblown a little bit. He played fine. He had 60 yards and scored a touchdown. He only averaged 3 yards a carry. Was it Deontay Foreman, however you say his first name? he has 66 yards on only 4 carries. So just the breakaway from Henry, they thought they could just kind of hit their head against the wall with Derrick Henry and win this game. And the Bengals kind of knew if we could stop him and make Tannehill, beat us, that we'd have a very good chance. A.J. Brown also had a very good game for the Titans, 142 yards and a touchdown, but it didn't have anything to really combat. Like Jamar Chase was over 100 yards. T. Higgins was right at 100 yards. While Joe Burrow didn't throw a touchdown, he obviously did enough for them to win the game. It was, the turnover. He did have one turnover, but you still win the turnover battle and everything. And Tennessee, like you said, they didn't look prepared. It was a home game for them. Didn't feel like it, especially when you kill that momentum on not just the first drive, but the first play action from Henry, roll out, pick right in the middle of the field. Like that kills your drive immediately. Yeah. It kills the hometown buzz and everything. And it was just trading slow, a slugfest from there on, and the Bengals came out on top.
What's amazing too is the last drive of regulation for the Titans would almost make the Cowboys blush about the way that they kind of coughed up the very end. Mm-hmm. This reminds me of like Madden from a decade ago. I don't know if you remember late in regulation, and when you play Madden, the computer will try and run the ball to chew up the clock, but the coach will call timeout. Right. And thus they're not chewing up the clock. Mm-hmm. Felt like that was the case with the Titans, where they were throwing the ball to try and get in field goal range, but they also were huddling and taking the full play clock. It's like, what? I'm confused what the goal here is. And I think the players were too. And Ryan Tannehill on the last play of the season coughs up the number 1 seed and they lose the game.
And, we talked about this last week, the what if scenario of if Derrick Henry never got hurt and they were able to just keep him rolling the whole way, does this Titans team look a little more confident, has a little more pep? Maybe, but that's just not the cards they were dealt. And the Bengals, they were underdogs, of course, going into this, the number 1 seed. Both number 1 seeds lost this past weekend, which I think it might be the first time that's ever happened. Usually at least one of them makes it through. But before we move on to the other number 1 seed losing, you got any last thoughts on this first game?
I said it last week. This was one of the weakest number 1 seeds I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And we saw it. And I was impressed about them performing without Derrick Henry. But, I mean, I just nothing about him. And I think we could all agree outside of Derrick Henry was any wow factor. Yeah. So they got there by tiebreakers and they go out by a last second play.
Yeah. And they definitely have to, on paper, I don't know if you move on from Tannehill because he seems to be the only, the receivers are set. They got Julio Jones and A.J. Brown. The defense is, good to great, good most days, great some days at times. They were able to exploit, the big thing that you're going to circle, and I'm sure that who are they playing? The Chiefs are going to circle, like the O-line on the Bengals is a huge issue. They're going to try and break that record of 9 sacks, I'm sure, if you're the Chiefs front four. The Titans were able to, they did what they wanted there. They attacked their weakness with their strength, and it wasn't enough because Joe Burrow still stayed in the pocket, knew he was going to get hit a lot, and delivered the ball, and scored just enough points to win. So, I mean, congrats to them, back to the AFC Championship. They got quite a hill to climb this Sunday against the Chiefs, but for now, for this past week, I'm sure they could at least getting to this point is an accomplishment for them, no doubt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they got to address the Titans for next year, that secondary, because they probably are going to have to play the Bengals again. Yeah. It's crazy, but shout out to the Bengals for getting it done.
Yeah, and that I could definitely see that being somewhere the Titans, as we move into draft season, look to get some high profile DBs in the draft, make a trade of some sort. Because if your front four is that good, and all you really have to do is weather that storm, and you can get the ball downfield because the secondary isn't with it, that's a pretty obvious way to exploit a team like that. Moving on to the next game here, we have the Niners and the Packers. This game was extremely head scratching. I mean, the Packers, they go right down the field, they score, and you're like, oh boy, thanks for coming, Niners. Thank you for beating the Cowboys, but this is where it ends. And then nothing happened for a quarter and a half. Absolutely nothing. I understand how cold it was. And I think if we didn't have the Bills just run up and down the field on the Patriots in 8-degree weather the week before, we would be talking more about the weather in this game. And while it was freezing, after seeing what the Bills did, that's just not as much of an excuse. And what I've noticed with the Niners in the past this run really, is they know how to win ugly, and they know how to win boring, they kind of rock you to sleep, and then you wake up and you lost by 6 and you don't know how it happened.
Yeah. One thing that's amazing, not too often when you have like a quarterback receiver combo to the likes of Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, do you see almost the quarterback more of a diva than the receiver is? I'm sure at some point Adams was like, "Hey man, I'm double covered.
Yeah.
Go somewhere else with the ball." And usually it's the other way around. It was amazing to me. I think, of course, we throughout the year had seen the Packers special teams be a disaster. I think they were worse in almost every category, like returns and block punts and stuff like that. And reared its head again. But to me, it was the case of when the Packers, they ran the ball about 4.5 yards a carry, so they were successful there. But when, Rodgers was forced to throw it, it seemed as though he was laser focused on Devontae Adams, and I think that was the game. So many drives stalled out, and you're just thinking, Jimmy G's not doing much of anything today. All he needs is to make one play, and he finally did in the fourth quarter to Kittle, and that was it. And they tied it, and then got a big miraculous break to win it with Robbie Gould. Shout out to the former Nittany Lion, Robbie Gould, for the win.
Absolutely. And you mentioned he was kind of laser focused there on his one receiver, and that's weird for Aaron Rodgers because in years past he's almost took that as a badge of honor to distribute the ball to different guys, the way Brady will tend to do it. He goes out of his way to not lazy. He'll throw a pass to somebody else. This is both Aaron and Brady. He'll throw a pass for 2 yards just to say he threw to somebody else for, just to mess with the math a little bit. And I mentioned, if you're a Titans defensive player, how you must feel. You must be sick to your stomach if you're a Packers defensive player. You give up 6 points all game, right? A block punt, not your fault. And that's it. That's the whole game. Like that's,
and like what, 12 drives, 13 drives? It's crazy.
Yeah. So, and basically this might be the first game in history. You might have to look it up for a team to win, and every point is scored on special teams because you had the block punt and you had the two field goals. Yeah. So like literally special teams outscored obviously the offense for those 6 points has to get them in field goal range, but like the actual point scoring being talking about for the brand, the special teams getting it done.
Yeah, for sure. It was just an insane game, and you just kind of, like you said, we're watching a baby getting rocked in slow motion. And Green Bay, this was the one team, you brought it up before the playoffs started. I could see them winning the Super Bowl, and you could also see them going one and done. And it all happened at once. You saw Super Bowl caliber offense to begin the game, and then you saw the rest of that nonsense. So, the question for San Francisco going into next week is, are they going to be able to get off to a better start? And certainly the weather should help. But yeah, it's just very unfortunate. And then when you factor in too, before of course we transition to that game, the Packers were playing not just in their home field, but the conditions they're used to. This is a fair weather team going across the country after an emotional ride to get into the playoffs. Really embarrassing to me. There's a lot of losses that sting. This has to be the worst.
I would agree. And I got plenty to say about Jimmy Garoppolo, but he has more to be talked about because he's playing in a game next week. The other quarterback here isn't. And of course that's Aaron Rodgers. Before we jump to that next game, what do you think is next for him? I think with the way this all happened, there's no way, there was talk like, oh, if they win the Super Bowl, maybe they just bury the hatchet and Aaron is a Packer for life. The way this has gone out, I would be shocked to see him in Green Bay next year. I don't necessarily know where he's going, but I see almost no chance of him staying there now.
If he was a free agent, I'd say no chance. I still am looking at, I think he's 2 years left under contract, maybe definitely 1, but no more than 2. I think there is some chance, only because this is like the third time we've heard about this. He's literally like Brett Favre Jr. by this point, with how often he's talking about how I don't need football or I don't need the Packers and all that stuff. But I do think kind of like I'm drawing a blank on the situation, but one of them's got to go. Either Adams or Rodgers has got to go because they just don't have the cap for any of that anymore. They sold out for this run, and They fell short. I'd give it maybe like a quarter chance, to be honest.
Well, Adams
Because
is
of the
Adams the
contract.
free agent, or are they both under
Yeah,
contract?
so
Okay.
they could technically franchise tag him, but
And
then they
trade
would have to
Rodgers.
get they'd have to get rid of a lot in
Yeah.
order for them to keep both.
I mean, I could see them trading Rodgers and maybe tagging Adams. Maybe I don't know. It's not a good situation to be in for sure.
I think if they knew Jordan Love was even 80% of Aaron Rodgers, they
Yeah.
would have gotten rid of this guy last year. But I
Yeah,
think
and I
Love
don't
is
know that
the
he's
answer.
50% of Aaron Rodgers from what we've
Mhm.
seen. That's the problem for sure. There will be plenty of times. It's going to be an interesting offseason. It's going to be plenty of times to talk about what Aaron Rodgers does next or when we start hearing all that. So definitely
Right.
to be continued on that. Moving into the Sunday games, we had what I would have called the best game of the day until we got to that late game, but the Rams and Bucks. Rams jump out to a huge lead. Tom does what Tom has done so many times before, starts crawling back, and like the Rams are just falling apart at the seam, right? Like,
Yeah.
the snap over the head, Cooper fumbles, Akers fumbles. Neither of those guys are known to put the ball on the ground. Just all those three things happen in like 8 minutes of game time, and you're just like, what is going on? The Bucks end up tying it up, and you're like, all right, we're going to overtime, and Brady's going to somehow get the ball first. More on that concept later, right?
Yeah.
And Stafford says, no, I'll chuck it up one more time. Cooper's down there somewhere. And he was, and they kicked the field goal. And like, it's like the secret stuff from Space Jam, and Tom Brady's had it his whole life. And the bottle finally ran out in this one. Like, he came all the way back just for, this was borderline the Atlanta Super Bowl. I think it was 21 or 23 points instead of the 25-point game, but pretty darn close. And, he comes all the way back and ties it, and Stafford just shuts the door at the end. And he's been waiting his whole career to be in big games like this. And he finally is, and he's 1 for 1, at least in the big game.
Yeah, shout out to him. Absolutely. I think this also closes the door on Cooper Kupp. He is the best receiver in the game right now. I like the regular season numbers were impressive, one of the best ever. But then he comes out, money on the line, trip to the NFC title, and he does that.
Yeah.
I think he's the best. It's hard to really crown him as number one because we've known Adams for years and Hopkins for years and all these other guys. But for 2021, I think that's the guy. And that's speaking as a Charger guy, watching this dude in the same building doing what he does is just fantastic. So, and then the other thing, the Rams, it's like they had a mile-long lead, like you said, in the marathon, and then you pull a hamstring and you're just trying to get across the finish line, and Cooper Kupp gets it done. But it's amazing because Tampa brought it all back after winning the Super Bowl, and they felt like this was a roster that could repeat. And, you heard it a little bit late in the year, and Levante David admitted after the playoff loss that, AB was a problem all year. He was incredibly tough to deal with. And, that's not breaking any headlines.
Yeah.
But this is, I think, more throughout the year, this was just more distraction than it's worth, one. And two, I think another thing that's interesting to think about is that Tampa Bay, part of what made them a Super Bowl champion last year, they're loose, they're no risk it, no biscuit attitude with Bruce Arians. I think ultimately they got really comfortable, and that structure in New England and structure in other, NFL teams, it would have been nice to have a little more of that. I think the Buccaneers got fat and happy with a lot of big contracts for their key players, and they got told all year that they're reigning champions, and I think that kind of hurt them in the end. Because to me, if you fall behind like that, 27-3 against the team that you're playing at home, I think that has a lot to do with the complacency they had. Brady did his best, but I think they came out a little bit too complacent today or last week.
The only word that you didn't use to describe them that fit last year and not this year was healthy. They were far and away last year the healthiest team in the league. There's no doubt about it. And this year they're, middle of the pack at best as far as health goes. And you can point to no Antonio Brown on the field is probably an issue. But I think if Chris Godwin's healthy in this game, Antonio Brown is a non-factor. I think when you go from
works too.
Yeah. So when you go from 3 to 4 Pro Bowl level options to 1, and Mike Evans, who I think is great, he's going to if he hasn't already, he's going to go down as the greatest receiver to ever be a Buccaneer, I think. And there's a handful of guys you can throw in there that are pretty darn good, but he's probably number one, and he'll probably be there for years to come as well. And, like we already said, shout out to Matt Stafford, the great game for him. They almost gave it away. Maybe they got all those jitters out. Maybe that won't happen if they're in a situation in the NFC Championship game next week. Who knows? And as far as the future of Tom and Tampa and anywhere else, I can't even begin to speculate on it yet, because he of course isn't saying anything. I think if you gave him truth serum, I'm not saying he's going to retire, but this is even mentally like the closest he's been to retiring. If he comes back, it's the closest he was to the other side before he came back over. That'd be my guess.
I'd be shocked if he retires for sure, especially the way that he played. I just think this is his frustration coming out, because this really was a devastating loss.
Yeah. What I don't like, though, and it's mostly like New England fans, a few Tampa fans or whatever, but like, oh, Tom can't go out like that. He can't go out on a loss. Well, he could have gone out on a Super Bowl if he wanted to, and he chose not to. So like, you can't take those for granted. Like when you're on that mountaintop, you can't just assume you're going to get there again. And that's been the biggest issue with every team that's won the Super Bowl in the modern era. Take my Eagles, for example, right? This is the new normal. That's what Doug Peterson was saying. Like there was no reason to think you couldn't run it back, and it all falls apart at the seams. And, even the Chiefs there for a minute looked a little shaky. They seem to have right the ship. Seattle, they go to back-to-backs, and then they throw the pick and they never go back. That team was supposed to run this decade. It never did. Like you can't take it, like you can't underlook getting to that mountaintop. Like if he wanted to go out on top and he didn't, and he doesn't get back there, I won't feel bad for him, because he had plenty of opportunities to go out on top. So if he has to go out on a loss, it's, you said hit me one too many times and you ended up with 24 instead of 21. That's on you.
That's a good phrase. We'll talk about it briefly later, but
sure.
Ben Roethlisberger went out on a horrific loss against the Chiefs, but I'm pretty sure nobody's looking at that in any sort of, bad light. So
people will more remember that he like dragged them. The story will be that he dragged them to the playoffs, and even though he was old and washed, they won't even talk about the playoff game itself. They'll just talk about the fact that he made the playoffs. That'll be that legacy for this year, I think.
Or talk about how the Raiders should have just went for a tie and the Steelers would have never made the playoffs. And
right, exactly.
But that's just rehashing old wounds. But
in Pittsburgh, the story will just be they made the playoffs. They won't talk about how they got there. But yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So I think a lot of Bucks, kind of like the Packers, a lot of Bucks will find new teams next year, which makes next season so fascinating, because the powerhouse teams out of the NFC, I think we're going to see the playoff seedings, a lot of them flip next year, because there's so many teams on top that are so salary screwed. None worse. I don't know if we'll ever get to this today, but the Saints are like $78 million over the cap. Like that doesn't even make any sense. They're
almost like double. Like I don't know what a salary cap is. The fine amount.
120.
Yeah. So
or something.
You're like 1.5 salary caps total. Like you all the money you're supposed to have is spent, and you're halfway into another one. Like that's crazy to me.
Breeze retired at least a year ago, if not two, and he's still $13.5 million dead cap money. It's crazy stuff. So, I don't know who their capologist is, but I'm pretty sure the Saints will probably take a step down next year, regardless of what they do. So, a lot of the NFC, playoff picture is going to change, which I'm sure makes the Niners lick their chops, and the Rams too, who are playing this weekend.
Absolutely. And that's a great way to go into this weekend. Within the next 48 to 52 hours, whatever it would be, we're going to know who's in the Super Bowl this year. We are down to the Final Four. The early game on CBS will be
wait, Chiefs and Bills. You want to talk about that? Talk about overtime?
I don't know how I missed that. Thank you.
I don't know either.
It's like the best game of the season. I don't know how I was going to cross over that.
Were you drinking water earlier? Or?
This is water. This is not vodka. I promise you.
Okay. Interesting.
So I mean, it is going to be hard, like what to say that hasn't already been said. What do you like? A lot of these good playoff games, they get like nicknames, right? To me, this is either the Gabe Davis game, right? UCF zone Gabe Davis with just a monumental record-breaking performance. To me, it's
welcome to point out to the UCF banner, by the way. You're welcome to point that out right now.
Absolutely. UCF zone, Gabe Davis. I have his UCF jersey, actually. He wore number 13 in college as well. I have that.
Nice.
So, it's either the Gabe Davis game or the 13-second game. And I think those are the only two. That's the main nicknames you can call this.
Well, a lot of fans out there want to call it the heads game because that was where the coin landed
mm-hmm.
to begin overtime. But we'll get to that soon.
Yeah, and it really, like, so much happened in this game. Damn near perfect for both guys. No turnovers, 7 touchdowns thrown total with 0 interceptions. Right. And somebody made the joke, like, the Bills should have gotten on the field again. Josh Allen did everything he could do. Someone said, well, he could have called heads. That's the only other thing.
Yeah.
Or he could have called it whatever it was. He could have called the other way. And that's really the only thing he could have done differently. There's a lot to be said in this game. The Gabe Davis thing, like I said, 200 yards, 4 touchdowns, record-breaking, most touchdowns ever by a receiver in a playoff game.
And you add in 200 yards of that segment.
Yeah. And people remember the picture last year of Stephon Diggs, like, watching the Chiefs celebrate. And he said, I waited a year to get back on this, right? And he had 3 catches for 7 yards. And, like, I get, obviously, Davis was feeling it. He had 10 targets, but Diggs had 6, so that means he dropped or didn't complete 3 others. His long, he had a catch of 5 yards. So that means the other 2 were about a yard apiece. So that is crazy because we all know how good Diggs is. And there are those days where you're just not the guy. Davis is the guy. Cole Beasley had a decent game. But yeah, just him being a complete non-factor is, like, the only other thing I can look to. But, like, the points got scored anyway, so I don't even know that I can look at that,
Right. How much of a non-factor was it? Because the offense was so crazy. And
right.
if the Titans secondary is embarrassed about the way they, stack them 9 times and Joe Burrow still drives him down for the win, I'd say the Bills secondary has to be way more embarrassed. I mean, that is a humiliating performance for Josh Allen to give them the win with 13 seconds left. And you had 2 drives in a row to stop Mahomes, or at least let him kick a field goal. And they couldn't do it. So ironically, the best defense in football, they picked a horrific time to play their worst of the entire season. So just a really, really humiliating loss. We talked about it last week. The Bills, it feels like they are slowly climbing the mountaintop that the Chiefs are on top of right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it appears with every time they play them, from last playoffs to this season to now this postseason, they're getting closer and closer to the Chiefs, who are getting older and older. So it seems as though unless the Bills kind of break this thing up, it's only a matter of time before they'll be able to take them.
I mean, I picked the Bills. I said this is when they overtake them. And, like, I can't even feel bad about the pick because of the way this went. Well, let's go back to the end of the game. Like you were saying, are you in the camp that they should have squib kicked with 13 seconds left? Or at least not just kick the touchback? Like, where do you stand on that? Because that's a big debate right now.
Is that? I don't understand. Of all the debates,
well, see,
I would say you should have employed the school of the 49ers, even though I was a little embarrassed with 30 seconds left. They were letting the Cowboys drive so close to the end zone, of where they had so many DBs to the sideline and back. They were basically letting them get 15 yards. I think that should be the discussion. What sort of coverage was that for their defensive coordinator? So a guy who's getting, all these different head coaching interviews and stuff like that. It's like, hey, he picked a horrible time to pick a pretty bad play call in a big spot.
No, but I'm the way the squib kick comes up because, like, all right, there's 13 seconds left. If you squib, even if they, like, get the ball and kind of fall on it, a second or 2 is off the clock. If they attempt to return it at all, it'll be 3 to 4 seconds. So then you basically you give the Chiefs 1 play instead of 2. And if and the question was, like, don't kick to Tyreek Hill. Apparently he wasn't even on the field for the return, so they could have squibbed it to whoever was back there, because if that guy thinks he's got a crease, it's just going to take more time. Basically, if they do any form of time wasting tactic, you go with that, I guess. And, like, maybe you just play with only 13 seconds left, like, play a regular defense, just, like, play the game, because they're gonna, you go Tampa 2, you have 2 deep safeties or whatever, but, like, just play the game normal. That way, like, all right, if they're going to go deep, like, we know we have guys out there, because he's got to catch the ball and either be gone, or he's got to catch the ball and get out of bounds. So really catching the ball isn't the issue, because 1 deep pass with 13 seconds. Let's say Tyreek Hill catches like a 50-yarder, but then gets tackled inbounds. They're not getting another playoff, and that game dies at the 20-yard line.
Really just a frustrating loss. With all of these crazy upsets goes a situation here where the Bills had the win in their hand and squander it to the point where, while we did talk about the Bills, it's only a matter of time. I do wonder just how this type of loss is going to affect the team moving forward, because while this wasn't a Super Bowl loss, there's such a thing as a Super Bowl hangover. And how many times have we seen a team completely fall apart,
Right.
The following year after losing a big playoff game or a big Super Bowl? So, which is why I'm curious about where the Bills will be next year and the Packers next year. Like, how much energy can you put into the offseason after feeling like you should have won the game?
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing that's definitely going to happen with the Bills after this is Gabe Davis is getting paid, whether it's by the Bills or by somebody else. I do hope it's the Bills.
Bitcoin.
Yeah, I do hope it's the Bills because he seems to fit, great there. And Josh Allen is obviously adding more and more trust to him to be able to like throw him the ball that many times and everything. But he's only going into his third year, so it'll be a little bit more time for that for sure. Now we will go to the Sunday games because we have now said them all. I appreciate you calling me on that. I might even edit that out. I don't know. I'll see how this looks.
Oh no, come on. No, let's keep all the gaffes and goofs in there. We like it that way here on Phil Talk Sports.
Yep. All right, you got it then. All right, so 3:00 CBS, Bengals and Chiefs in Arrowhead. Chiefs are a touchdown favorite. It's easy to say, like, the way I look at it, if the Bills couldn't beat them when they did everything right, granted the Bengals have beaten the Chiefs earlier this year, but I don't know how much the Bengals really had to play for at that moment. So I think they were maybe jockeying for the number one seed, but the Bengals are fighting for their life. So that's a whole nother situation. I think it's safe to assume the Chiefs win this game. It might be a little closer than people think. It might be right around that 7 points that the Chiefs are getting. Unless, there's the version of this where the Chiefs, used all their gas last week and they come out flat. But we've seen so many games where, they could be down 21-10 and then the Chiefs come roaring back. So you never know. It's hard to not pick the Chiefs on this one.
I think this is the one year where you literally cannot use that argument because everybody used all their gas for a last second game. Yeah. Everybody who's playing still, it's like everybody is square at zero. It's like everybody's playing in the same conditions. Right. You can let me know how this game finishes. It's not on Nickelodeon, so I'm not really.
I'm not gonna be able to see it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a rematch of Week 17 Cincinnati win. And speaking of controversy in late game situations, the Bengals had a long 17-play drive to close out that game at home against the Chiefs. And the play that I remember the most was watching the Bengals have a 4th and goal at the 1 with 48 seconds left. And I was screaming at the TV, kick a field goal to take the lead. It was tied at 31 with 48 seconds left. And they go for the win. But of course, knowing if you don't complete the pass or don't run it in with Mixon, you give the Chiefs the ball, granted at their own 1, but a chance to win it with just a field goal. And they got the benefit of a pass interference in the end zone, and then they still didn't kick a field goal. They still were going for it. We got penalties back. It was a crazy finish, and then McPherson, caps it off. But what was lost in that game was Joe Burrow was 30 for 39, 446 yards and 4 touchdowns. And I don't even know if that's the best performance he's had in the last 4 weeks. So just an incredible performance by Burrow. And I think it's safe to say he's got to play the exact same way if they want to have a chance in this one.
Agreed. And I'm picking the Chiefs. I don't know if you made your decision yet, but like if the Bengals win, I'll be surprised, but I won't be shocked because they could weirdly find a way to do it again. And regardless, I think we know now that a star is born and Joe Burrow has arrived. This whole playoff is his, coming out party. It's kind of Matt Stafford is kind of similar on the other side, but he's been in the league for 13 years. This is Burrow's second, but both of them, as far as playoff moments and stuff, they both arrived in this postseason.
Yeah, a couple of number 1 picks, so there's a chance they could play in the biggest game, and that'd be crazy. I think the only chance is that, for the Bengals to win is if Kansas City's defense falls apart. That we
Right.
saw that pass defense struggle all year. They gave up, so many big plays to Davis last week. Tyrann Mathieu still in concussion protocol. He is probable to play. Andy Reid thinks he will, but that's a huge, huge injury status to look at over the next 48 hours. But I still got the Chiefs.
Yeah.
Even though that matchup isn't all that favorable for Kansas City, there's a reason they're a touchdown favorite.
Yeah.
Not often do you see that many points given to a team in an AFC championship. So I got Kansas City about by a touchdown, maybe 35-28, somewhere in that ballpark.
Next, we have the Rams and Niners round 3 in the playoffs here for the, for all the marbles, the trip to the Super Bowl. The funny thing here is if the Niners win, they will be the first team to beat 2 division rivals in the playoffs on their way to the Super Bowl, because we've never had we didn't have the 7th wild card to where, all 3 of them can get into the playoffs or whatever.
Right.
So that would be crazy. The Niners, they're 7 straight on the Rams since, the past couple of years.
6 straight.
6 straight. So going for 7 straight for this. The Rams are at home, and this is where I want to start. But are they really? Because Niners fans are going to travel. That's barely that's
the number is 42% of the ticket sales are from Northern California.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of Niner fans in Southern California.
Sure, because that's been the team in California forever. So I mean, the Chargers had their people. The Rams were not in LA for a long time, and if this game starts going south, there's going to be people in that stadium looking like when do the Lakers play next? They're gonna the fan base in LA for the Rams. Granted, they've already made one trip to the Super Bowl. It's very touch and go. I don't know that it's fair weather, because it almost doesn't matter if they're winning, but it matters if they're exciting. That's what it takes to get Rams fans out there. And, the new stadium is awesome.
Especially Chargers fans. So I can tell you from personal experience.
So would you say, at best, this is going to be or at worst, best, whatever your team is, this is basically going to be a 50. This is almost going to be a neutral site game. Is the way I look at it.
Give or take. One other side note, not related to the actual play of the game, is that the average ticket or the average price of parking now to get in the actual building. Now there's parking across the street, they got the Forum right there, and a bunch of houses, $500 to get the parking right there. So I don't know if it's Niners or Rams fans that'll show out more, but there's going to be a lot of rich folks that are showing out to that game on Sunday.
And the rich folks tend to be quieter too. So the atmosphere is going to be a little different, I think, at something like this. And the Rams have the ability to win this and be in the Super Bowl in their home stadium. So we went from never having that to potentially we can have it 2 years in a row. So that would be very interesting as well.
Yeah, the only dangerous thing is that literally everybody has already, made that a storyline for this coming Super Bowl. So, and the game hasn't been played yet. They're only 3.5-point favorites, and the Niners are going to bring their people. And the Niners, they outgained the Rams when they played Week 18, 449 to 265. So I'd say the Niners have to feel pretty confident about their abilities to play San Francisco or to play Los Angeles. And I think the Niners licked their chops knowing the Rams secondary and defense overall wasn't what it was last year. And Jimmy Garoppolo statistically couldn't have played much worse without a turnover last week. So he's got to be able to play a little bit better, just by law of averages. I really think that this game is going to look a lot like the games they both played last week, right down to the final whistle.
Yeah. And you mentioned Jimmy G a little bit. It's got to be so weird. We give up how many picks to get Trey Lance if you're a Niner fan, and it's still Jimmy G that's taken us this far.
Jordan Love 2.0.
Yeah. And the thing is, if they win, if they go all the way, right? What do you do with Jimmy G moving forward? It'll almost be like a Nick Foles situation. It's you can't not play the guy, I guess. I mean, it might turn Trey Lance into a Josh Rosen situation where they just move on from him before he ever really got a shot. But that's a lot of if, buts, and maybes, because the Niners, a lot of things have to go right for them to pull this off. The Rams, I think, are more clearly the Packers were one-dimensional, right, with their offense. We knew who they were throwing to. The Rams don't necessarily have that. Obviously, Cooper Kupp is a star, but they have plenty of other guys to work with. And you mentioned Cooper Kupp still could potentially be the MVP the way he's been playing. The playoffs are not supposed to matter for that, but I never understand why they don't just announce the MVP like the week after the season. Like if what's going on in the playoffs isn't supposed to matter for the regular season MVP, why haven't we announced that already? Same with the
And
NBA.
the other weird
same with these other sports.
We're going on a little bit of a tangent here. I understand. Ultimately, we got to get to a prediction of this game.
Yeah.
But the other thing that is perplexing to me is, like you mentioned, MVP. They announced it before the start of the Super Bowl. They announced Pro Bowlers before the final week of the year, and they announced All Pro players about a month and a half before the season ends.
Yeah.
Like I think that has a lot to do with how team plays. So
right.
Weird to me.
I'm gonna tiptoe out on a limb a little bit, even though they're the favorites. They don't really feel like it, I guess, but I'm gonna go with the Rams with the thought process of like they're as good as the Packers offensively, and they can do it in more ways. Like they're they got guys in the backfield, they have guys at receiver. Cooper Kupp is like Wes Welker mixed with Larry Fitzgerald is the way the comp I'd kind of give him, right? And he can just. Obviously, with Deebo Samuel, you're one snap away from a touchdown at any given moment. So the Niners, this will be close. That's why they're only giving them 3.5, like you said. But I will go with the Rams on this one. I'm enjoying both of these teams, but it does seem like Stafford's on a mission. Like you beat Tom Brady, you feel like after that, there's nothing you can't do. If you're him, that's how you probably feel.
Yeah, these playoffs have been so weird, man. Like we have predicted so many wrong teams throughout the course of this postseason. Last year, we were spitting fire. We couldn't miss the whole year, but this postseason, I think I've gotten 4 games wrong. I don't know about you, something like that.
I know I picked the Rams. I know I picked the Bills. I think I picked the Titans. I think the Rams are the only ones I got right going into this. From last week anyway. Yeah, because I think
I think both of us have 4 games we missed because I missed 2 in the wild card. You missed 1. So and I missed 2 last week. So
we might settle right around 500 if these people because so if we pick the same here because we both picked the Chiefs. I got the Rams.
I got the Rams too.
Okay, yeah. So we'll see if we go through on here. So let's play this game too before we transition to stuff outside of the playoffs. What is the best matchup for ratings and all that sort of stuff? And what's the worst here? What would you say?
Man, there's the funny thing is, I think there are great storylines with both AFC teams.
Yeah.
Mahomes comes in trying to avenge last year's Super Bowl, and we all know the big names for Kansas City.
Right.
And then the other matchup being, Cincinnati's Cinderella run, which is always cool to see. In the NFC, I believe that the storylines are a little better, even though it'd be cool to see San Francisco pull this off. I don't think a lot of people want to see the Niners in the Super Bowl because it almost doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah.
We don't know much about the team other than Deebo and Jimmy G and George Kittle, who was really quiet this year. I think a lot of people wanted to see the Rams host the Super Bowl, what that's going to look like with the LA fans. And of course, I think of the AFC, if I had to choose, I think Rams and Bengals would be a really, really cool story, but Rams and Chiefs is right there.
Yeah, I would say so. The thing with the Bengals Niners, probably to the casual fan, is like the not as good one. But you can pull from the past. Like that's a Super Bowl rematch from the 80s.
Yeah.
And they'll pull from that a little bit. And like if the Niners get there, maybe they win ugly again. He'll be the first guy. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, my camera was freezing up there. I got a phone call. I use my phone as a camera here.
Of course, right in the middle of your great rant.
Of course. But so if the Niners get there with another ugly win, Jimmy G will get to the Super Bowl without throwing a touchdown in the playoffs. And the last guy that did that was Tom Brady in 2001. And
really?
That first magical run, he didn't throw a touchdown until they got to the Super Bowl. So I agree with you. I do think the Rams Chiefs is like the big money matchup, right? And then the Niners Bengals will be, for the casual fan, might be a little bit of a letdown. Like you said, there's enough storylines with all these guys that like I don't think there's a bad matchup left to be had here.
Yeah, I think Rams and Bengals maybe takes a little steam off only because you go into that Super Bowl thinking, well, the Rams or the Bengals are such a Cinderella story, but in reality, they have a lot of holes still.
Right.
Where if the Chiefs get there, we really feel like this is a great, great football team and a rematch, by the way. I didn't even remember this for all those casual fans of one of the greatest. I'm not sure of it. There's too little defense in that game.
Mm-hmm.
I know there were defensive touchdowns, but too little defense overall. Goff's Rams at home, 54-51 over the Chiefs. Crazy game. It'd be a really cool. I think we'd see too many highlights of that game, but I think we're set for that, and that'll be a really, really cool lead up to it in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and we have a few weeks going into that when we do our Super Bowl prediction. We're going to bring in Hank, PR52, who I just did a guest spot on his podcast, Throwing Snowballs, talked a little Eagles football. That was a lot of fun. So I'm glad we get to get him on here for this. So the three of us will be able to talk to Super Bowl within the next 2 weeks here. We get that 2-week gap, of course, between the NFC Championship, the conference championship games and the Super Bowl. So that's kind of on hold until we get our victors here. A couple more NFL things going in before we get out of here. We have the first spin of the coaches carousel has already started. I'll let you take this one. What are you most surprised to see? Do you like the hirings that have been made so far, or how do you feel?
Well, this podcast is just getting up and running, and we've already lasted longer than so many head coaches in this league.
Yeah.
Rich Bisaccia, he's potentially going to be there with Vegas after an incredible run of the postseason.
I think he deserves it, really. I do. After
what
he went
Urban
through,
Meyer
deserves a chance.
Right. Urban Meyer just put down his down payment on the Jacksonville house, and he's already given the boot. David Coley, likewise, maybe he didn't even get his down payment in Houston before he's given, the show to the door. The biggest surprise to me was Sean Payton and what he announced, but overall, it seems every year there's always a couple of coaches who inexplicably get let go. But to me, like you said, I think Rich Bisaccia is one of the best coaches. If that of all the teams, I think the Raiders would be one of the best off if they retain Rich Bisaccia. I think he'd be terrific. I think wherever Brian Flores lands will be a great hire. There's already 2 hires: Nathaniel Hackett, Packers OC to the Broncos. I don't know how much of that is Aaron Rodgers, how much of that is Nathaniel Hackett. To me, I'd say more the former than the latter. So I'm not quite sure Denver is going to feel very good in a couple of years with him as head coach, but we'll see. And then Matt Eberflus, the Colts, what got lost last year, he's now a Bears head coach, is that, the defense was very good with a lot of no-namers. So I think he might end up being all right with Chicago. The only problem is Justin Fields, that I thought he'd be pretty good, but he actually kind of wet the bed a little bit in quite a few games. He got better towards the end, but throwing more picks than touchdowns in 2021 is certainly, even as a rookie with Nagy as your head coach, say what you want about him, he's still good enough to bring Trubisky to the playoffs a couple of times. I'd be a little concerned about what Eberflus is inheriting at quarterback and on offense.
Yeah, a lot of these early signings aren't what we expected. Like I was hearing whispers of like Flores to the Bears. That obviously didn't happen. Usually these early, like these teams that have been out of the playoff picture for a while kind of had more time to think about this. They usually make like the splashier hires because they have, first crack at everybody, right? And that didn't seem to happen. Nathaniel Hackett for Denver, like you said, a lot of people are saying that's basically to get Aaron Rodgers there if that is where he wants to go. That remains to be seen. The Sean Payton thing is interesting because he's flat out said, I'm not retiring. Like he's basically said without saying, I'm going to go to like a TV studio for 2 years and then come back. And a lot of eyes are leading him to Dallas, but we don't get anything out of that. Jerry Jones talks a lot, but he says nothing. So there's not going to really,
I don't think he's going to go there either.
No, I mean, Jerry Jones wants him. That there's no doubt about that. I think if he knew he'd get him, he'd fire McCarthy right now, but he doesn't know that. So he's keeping him for sure. But I think the second wave, that's when a lot of the, the start-stop thing with Byron Leftwich and the Jags, that looked like a done deal about 2 days ago, and now it hasn't come out, and they've even interviewed someone else since then, and now I'm hearing Leftwich to the Saints. So that could be interesting as well. So definitely this first spin is, just kind of displacing a lot of people. I think the second go around after the season is where we get a lot of the big and familiar names going places.
So I got two places that I think would be interesting to talk about just real quick. First, the Raiders, they are going to interview Josh McDaniels tomorrow. And how could the Raiders, Derek Carr, Max Crosby, how could they show up to work this year knowing that we got rid of Rich Bisaccia for a guy who flamed out in Denver and has not yet proven himself in the NFL?
I don't know if the audio listeners could hear me roll my eyes at the thought of McDaniel. Like, how does anybody go anywhere near Josh McDaniels after the shit he pulled with the Colts a couple years ago? Like, are we supposed to just forget about that? Yeah. I don't know how we're supposed to. Like, the Denver thing is one thing. People have bad, stints places, but to like sign up with the Colts, they have the billboard at the airport. They're waiting for you to get off the plane, and you're still in New England. Like I remember talking about that on the show 2-3 years ago.
At least Bill Belichick was at the Jets for one day. He at least showed up to the press conference.
Yeah, he had the decency to write his resignation on a napkin at least. McDaniels didn't do any of that. So I always assumed that McDaniels, when he stuck into the Colts like that, it basically was decided you'll be the Patriots coach when and if Bill Belichick hangs it up. Because I don't see how anybody else could take him seriously.
Right. And especially the Raiders, they just had a 10-win season with a guy. They literally have a whole year sample size of a coach who everybody loves. So that I thought was fascinating. And then the second thing, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you brought it up a moment ago, the Jacksonville thing. They've already interviewed Byron Leftwich twice, and I know they're looking elsewhere, maybe doing their due diligence. Maybe they didn't like the guy, but Leftwich is one of the hot coordinators right now. And I think Leftwich, with his ties in that area, I think.
Yeah, former quarterback for the Jags. Like, he's loved in that area. It seems like an obvious fit. So I don't know what the holdup is really.
Right. And say what you want about the Bucs and, Brady carrying that offense, but, he guided that offense with Jameis Winston to a top 3 mark. So I know a lot of picks, but I think Leftwich is actually one of the better coordinators. Bieniemy, for some reason, for some weird reason, still is not getting any, serious looks. And, we're hearing other guys, but to me, Leftwich is a hot one. Brian Flores is, and, there's a couple of good guys out there. And then the Raiders are doing what they're doing.
The thing with the Jags, it seems like every guy that they are interested in, it basically said, but you got to get rid of this GM, right? Like, I don't care who it is. Like, some of them probably want their own guy, but others
talking about Shad Khan, the Jags GM.
No, so he's the owner, but I forget the GM. He's the reason everyone was wearing the clown suits in Jacksonville. Like, it was to get that guy fired, I think. But so, and if the Raiders end up keeping their coach, that's understandable. But if not, I think Doug Peterson would be a great pick. Yeah, it should be a great pick for Vegas.
There's so many great coaches. Jim Caldwell, I don't know if you remember him. 100%. He's still out there.
He'd be a great pick in Jacksonville also because he's very no nonsense and he'll just get it. He'll get things moving. I think like
Tom Coughlin.
Yeah, Tom Coughlin, but a little more likable, I think, from what I understand. But if the Jags don't get Leftwich, I think most Jags fans are gonna call that a disappointment. Jim Caldwell will be fine. I think the Saints getting one of those guys, or even Doug Peterson in New Orleans, would be interesting. But yeah, definitely we have another spin on this before really the coaching carousel becomes a little more clear where all these guys are going to go.
Right. Yeah. Just really a shame. I think these GMs need I don't know, take a patience class, go to therapy.
Yeah.
A lot of these guys can't even last a full season. Bisaccia, Meyer, David Coley, Joe Judge, they had the decency to keep them around 2 years. But I just think these guys need to calm down and relax, like I was even hearing Brandon Staley was this close, to getting let go, and Mike McCarthy 2 years. Say what you want. There's only 1 or 2 Bill Belichick's and Andy Reid's out there. So I think that you keep, creating a turnstile coaches and you become the Lions and the Jags and the Texans where it's like, you never bring in any good talent because you're too busy firing coaches and GMs.
I agree. And I mean, like you look at the teams that have made the hires, like was anybody beating down the door for Nathaniel Hackett? Like you couldn't have waited to make sure that that's the guy you wanted. Like nothing against him. He might turn out to be great in Denver. I have no idea. And like the Bears, like I was hearing Flores and then they just went and hired, the Colts assistant. So it's like a little bit of patience definitely goes a long way. I'm with you on that.
Right. Yeah. Crazy stuff.
Crazy stuff. And it's only going to get crazier. And like I said, within the next 48 hours, we're going to know who's in the Super Bowl. So I want to thank you guys for listening. Next time we're talking NFL football, it'll be me, Nick, and Hank will be joining us. So I want to thank you guys for listening. Enjoy the games this weekend, and we'll see you next time.